Hello, everyone. Warm welcome to you all. My name is Erin Tanzi. I am the director of the Sustainable Inclusive Economies Division at the International Development Research Center. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, Canada. We are happy to have you join us for part two of our webinar series, Lessons and Takeaways, Learning Together to Advance Evidence and Equity in Policymaking to Achieve the SDGs in Africa, otherwise known as LEAPS. Today's focus is on the transition to low carbon economies in Africa, one of the two thematic priorities of the LEAPS partnership. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that IDRC's head office, where I'm speaking from today here in Ottawa, is situated on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, whose stewardship of the land and waters we now call Ottawa dates back to time immemorial. In a few moments, I'll introduce you to our presenters and our panelists, but first, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague and co-moderator, Dr. Flaubert Mbiekop, who is our Senior Program Specialist at IDRC within the Sustainable Inclusive Economies team. So over to you, Flaubert.
Merci, Erin.
Thank you so much, and hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to today's second LEAPS webinar. To open today's discussion, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the LEAPS partnership. The LEAPS partnership is a vital program, an essential initiative that strengthens the way that evidence is produced, translated, and used in policymaking in sub-Saharan Africa. LEAPS places a strong emphasis on gender equality and inclusion. This initiative is funded by IDRC, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and the Robert Bosch Stiftung. During today's session, our panel will examine the following question. Do knowledge synthesis mechanisms play an important role in promoting sustainable development goals, the SDGs? Our panelists will be addressing this topic in the context of the transition to low carbon economies in Africa. Erin, on that note, I'll hand you back the floor to introduce our special guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Flaubert. We're fortunate today to have really an esteemed panel of research and policy leaders that are going to join us from both East and West Africa. Our three speakers represent each of the LEAPS regional hubs, and they're going to provide an overview of the hubs and how the work they are doing related to the transition to low carbon economies under LEAPS and how that works. So our guests will also share their own perspectives on how their work within the LEAPS initiative is strengthening the ecosystem for evidence-based policymaking in Africa. So our first guest is Dr. Amadou Gueye. He will give a presentation on the work of the Evidence Policy Action Center of Excellence, which is led by the African Center for Equitable Development and the Prospective Agricultural and Rural Initiative. Dr. Gueye, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Moderatrice.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I would like to welcome all of my colleagues here who are joining me to speak and everybody who is listening to this very important webinar. I would also like to thank IDRC, a very important partner, for having invited us and for this initiative as well. This initiative brings two fundamental questions to the table. First of all, the production and use of data, and we've We're
des
looking at
pays
that
africains, qui
through
est un peu
an
la
important
transition
theme, so
écologique,
development of
mais
different
à
African
travers
countries
un
and
système
an
à faible
ecological
carbone,
transition, a
qui est
green
aujourd'hui
transition towards
un
low
sujet important.
carbon economies. We
Je
know this
m'appelle
is a more and more
Amadouke, je
important
suis
topic.
co-coordinateur du Centre d'excellence LIPS,
My
qui est
name
une
is
initiative
Amadou Gueye,
que
and
nous
I'm
avons mis en place
co-coordinator for
dans le
the
cadre de
LEAPS
la mise en
Center.
œuvre
This is
du programme LIPS que
an
mon
initiative
ami et
that we've
frère
put in place.
Flaubert parlait tout à
So
l'heure.
the
Nous,
EPA
dans le
Center
cadre
of
de notre initiative
Excellence,
en Afrique de l'Ouest,
which is led by the
ACLI
African Center
IPA,
for Equitable
pour une
Development
initiative de mettre en
and
place
the
un centre
Prospective
d'excellence
Agriculture and Rural
dans la ville
Initiative.
francophone,
And
une première pilote
we are here
dans
to
plusieurs
really
pays
have a
de l'Afrique
center of
de
excellence
l'Ouest, à
for
savoir le Mali, le
several
Burkina Faso,
countries
le Sénégal, Togo,
In
Côte
Western
d'Ivoire,
Africa, Burkina
Bénin
Faso, Ivory
et Burkina
Coast,
Faso.
Benin, Burkina
Dans ces
Faso, amongst
pays,
others.
on travaille
In
sur
these
plusieurs
Western
thématiques
African
qui
countries,
sont
we are
des
working
thématiques
on several different
d'importance pour
themes
ces
that are
pays en
extremely
développement,
important
à
for these
savoir
developing
les questions
countries.
relatives à la
For
souveraineté
example,
alimentaire,
issues
au
with regard
capital
to
humain,
food sovereignty,
au changement
human
climatique,
capital,
à une question
climate
aussi
change.
transversale relative
There's
au genre et
also a
l'équité, mais aussi
transversal
nous
issue
travaillons
with
sur la
regard to gender and
transition
equity.
écologique, notamment sur
We
les
are
questions
working on
de
ecological
faire
transition as well.
des économies à faible
So
carbone.
again, to move
Maintenant,
towards
dans le
a low
cadre de la
carbon
mobilisation
economy.
des données, au
Now, if we look
niveau
at
de notre
data
approche,
mobilization,
nous avons
throughout our
parti un peu
approach,
d'une approche qu'on appelle de co-construction.
and this
On n'est
approach is
pas
a
venu pour dire
co-construction
exactement
approach.
aux acteurs,
In other
voici
words,
la
we're
meilleure
not here
méthode
to tell
pour pouvoir
actors what to
mobiliser
do.
les données,
We're
mais
not
aussi
here
les
to tell
utiliser.
stakeholders what
Mais
the
nous sommes
best methods
partis
are to
dans une
use
perspective de
data. We've
co-collaborer avec
instead
l'ensemble des
used
acteurs.
an
Pour
approach
ce
where we
faire, nous
work
avons
with
d'abord
all of the
commencé dans
stakeholders.
différents pays
To do that,
d'intervention
we've
à
started
faire un
working
peu
in
la
the
connaissance de l'écosystème.
relevant
C'est pourquoi
countries
nous
in order
avons
to better
commencé le
understand their
projet à faire
ecosystems.
un peu
And that's why we
l'évaluation des
started the
conditions pour savoir
project. We
qui sont les
started
acteurs
by
dans chaque pays,
evaluating the
quelles sont
situation
les
on the ground
interactions qui
to better
existent, mais
understand the
aussi quels sont les
stakeholders, the
défis auxquels
interactions,
aujourd'hui
and
ces acteurs
also the
font face
challenges
lorsqu'il
that
s'agit de
these
mobiliser les
stakeholders
données,
see
mais aussi de
today when
les
it comes
utiliser.
to data
À partir
mobilization
de ce
and use.
diagnostic-là, on a essayé
From
aussi
that,
d'identifier quelles sont
after we diagnose,
les
if you will,
pluralités dans chaque
we
pays,
try
dans
and
une perspective
identify
de
the
valoriser les connaissances, mais
pluralities in
aussi
each one
amener
of the
les acteurs à
countries
les
in
utiliser.
order to better
Donc,
use
on
the
a
knowledge
essayé
and the
dans chaque
stakeholders and
pays
what
de
they
faire
have to
cette
offer.
liste-là,
So
ce
in
qui fait
every
que
country,
la
we try to
problématique a été
itemize the
d'identifier une
list
priorité
so that the
pour les décideurs
problem
qui sont là-bas. Je pense que ça, c'est
so
d'abord
that
le
we can
premier
better
point qu'il
identify
faudrait
the
marquer, parce que si
problem
vous
that
voulez,
needs
c'est
to
pas
be
juste la
addressed.
méthode
I think that's
qui
the first
importe
thing that
pour
we need to
pouvoir
say, because
mobiliser
it's
les
not
données,
just
mais aussi
the
les utiliser, mais
method
en premier lieu,
for
il faut que les
mobilizing and
décideurs
using
soient
data.
impliqués dans le
First of all,
processus, mais
decision
aussi
makers need to
sa
be
priorité
involved in the
soit
process,
prise aussi
and
dans cette
we also
perspective-là.
need to
Après
take
cela,
into
nous avons
consideration the
essayé de
different points
renforcer
of
les
view.
capacités des acteurs
After
parce
that, we
que
try
une
and
chose est de
strengthen
vouloir,
or do
mais l'autre
capacity
aussi est de
building.
pouvoir.
Because it's
Donc,
one
nous
thing
avons
to
aussi
know,
essayé
but then you
d'identifier
need
avec
to
les
be able to
différents acteurs
do.
dans le
So,
cadre de
with the
la
different
chaîne de la production
stakeholders,
et de
we've
l'utilisation
tried
des
to
données, là où
identify
il voudrait
in the
également qu'il
chain of
soit
production
renforcé.
for
Et c'est
data
pour
use, we've
identifier cela
tried
avec
to
les
see
acteurs
where we
que
need
nous
to do
avons voulu
capacity
également
building, where we need to
faire un
strengthen
programme de
this.
renforcement de
So, with the
capacité.
different actors,
L'autre
we're
aspect
working
aussi,
on a
c'est
capacity
l'aspect de
building program.
co-apprentissage.
After
Donc,
that,
on a
there's
essayé
the
aussi de
co
voir
learning aspect.
dans chaque pays quels sont
We
les
tried to
acteurs qui ont
see in
fait
each
preuve
one
de
of the
connaissance que
countries
d'autres acteurs en ont besoin. On a
who the
essayé de faire
actors are,
un
who needs
co-apprentissage
perhaps a
à
little bit
l'intérieur
more
de ce pays,
knowledge
mais aussi on a
within
un
the countries,
co-apprentissage
but
qui est
also
croisé entre les
we
différents
have
pays. Je prends juste l'exemple
some
des
knowledge
institutions
that
statistiques
involves several
du
different countries.
Sénégal,
For
du
example,
Burkina
the
Faso et du Mali,
statistical
où nous avons
organizations
quand
of
même pu
Senegal, Mali,
les
and
amener
Burkina Faso,
à faire un
where
co-apprentissage
we were able
les
to do
données sensibles en
co-learning
temps.
on
Maintenant, revenons à la
data.
question
Now,
des
let's
économies
come back
à
to
faible carbone.
the
Nous
low
avons
carbon
pu
economy question.
accompagner deux processus, notamment
We were able
au
to
niveau
have
de
two
la Côte d'Ivoire,
processes
où nous avons
in the
mis à
Ivory Coast
disposition
where we
un expert pour aider à
we
mise en
set up
place
an
d'équipes
expert
méthodologiques
in order
de
to help for the
collecte et
implementation,
de
for
traduction des données
methodology, for data
climatiques
collection
pour
and
permettre
translation. And here we're talking about
à la Côte d'Ivoire
climate data.
de pouvoir
This is to
renforcer
allow
un
the
peu
Ivory Coast
sa
to
visibilité par rapport
strengthen
aux données
its visibility with regard to
climatiques
data,
qui sont
to climate
utilisées
data.
pour pouvoir élaborer des stratégies dans le
This
cadre des
the goal
économies
of this
affectées
is
par
to
l'eau.
help
Nous sommes aussi en
in
train d'accompagner le
elaborating different
processus au Mali,
strategies and developing
plutôt au
strategies.
Mali,
We're also
où nous
doing similar
accompagnons
processes
l'Agence de
in
développement
Mali,
durable
where we are
sur la
accompanying the
capitalisation de
Sustainable
l'ensemble
Development
des activités
Agency
relatives
to
à
try
l'environnement
to
qui ont été
capitalize on
menées
all
ces 10
of the
dernières années. Et
activities
cette
that
synthèse
have been done with regard to the
d'informations
environment
sera
in
mise
the
à la
last few years.
disposition des
All of this
décideurs pour
information
pouvoir
will then be made
aujourd'hui se
available to
projeter
decision makers
dans les
in
nouvelles
order
perspectives
to
que nous voulons.
be
Voici
able
plus ou moins
to
les différentes
project
approches que
all
nous
of this
avons
into the
utilisées
future, into
pour
new
pouvoir à la
perspectives.
fois mobiliser les
So,
données, mais aussi
generally,
les
those are
traiter.
the
Maintenant, ce
approaches
qu'il
that we've
faudrait
used to
peut-être
mobilize
garder
data
ensemble,
and
je
to
pense qu'il y
use
a
the
deux
data.
ou à trois
One thing
dimensions.
that we need to
La
keep in
première
mind
dimension,
is
c'est
the two
d'abord
or three
l'implication des acteurs,
dimensions
notamment les
here. First of
décideurs,
all,
qu'ils soient
involvement
dans le
of
processus,
actors,
et puis qu'ils
involvement
puissent
of
aussi
decision
faire une
makers. They
identification
need to
de
participate in
l'ensemble
the
des
process,
priorités
and
ensemble.
we need to be able
La
to
deuxième
identify the
approche,
plurality
c'est par
of
rapport à la mobilisation
issues
des
and
données,
opportunities.
qu'elle ne se
And then
fasse
there's
pas
data
top-down, mais qu'elle
mobilization.
soit
It's not a
conçue avec les
top-down
acteurs.
approach. It's
Maintenant, si on
something that
travaille
is
avec
co-developed
l'environnement,
with the
on
different
essaie
actors.
d'identifier
So we're
les
working
acteurs
here with
clés
regard to the environment.
de cette
So we
chaîne de
need to
valeur pour pouvoir
identify
les
the actors
mobiliser
of this
et
value
eux
chain
même qu'ils
in
fassent
order
la
to
correcte
mobilize them
utilisation
and
des
to get
données. Et je
them
pense que cette
to do the
approche
data
que
collection and the data
les
use.
décideurs
And I
voient que
think
les acteurs
that
internes même
in
sont
this
impliqués
approach,
et que
decision
cela puisse
makers
aussi
get to
donner
see that all the
plus ou moins
actors
cette
are truly
garantie que les
participating.
données sont utilisées
So
et
that
seront
guarantees
collectées
that the data
sont fiables
will
et pourront
be
être utilisées
um,
de manière sûre. L'autre aspect
that,
aussi,
that, that
c'est
it can be
l'opportunité
safely
de
used and that we can
co-apprentissage
trust the
avec
data.
d'autres
Then
acteurs qui ont
again,
peut-être de
there's the
l'expérience
opportunity to
dans ce
learn
domaine-là, ou
alongside
bien
other
que
actors who
une
perhaps
seule
already
méthode
have
peut-être lorsqu'on
experience
parle
in
de la
this area.
modélisation et l'utilisation
So
des
when we
données,
talk about
ne peut pas
data
être
production
unidirectionnelle,
and data
mais il
use,
faut pouvoir
we
avoir
know that
cette approche écosystémique dans
that
laquelle
this
chaque
stems from an
acteur soit valorisé,
ecosystemic approach.
mais aussi
In other
ses
words, each one of the
considérations
actors is
seront aussi
mobilized,
valables.
and
Donc,
the
ce que vous
considerations of
pouvez
each
peut-être
stakeholder
partager
is really
en
taken in,
amont, et
is really
certainement avec les questions et
looked
les
at.
réactions,
So
nous pouvons
in
revenir
general,
plus
that's
en
what I
détail
wanted to present
sur
to
cet
you.
enrichissement
And
de
when
la
we answer
présentation.
questions, I hope to
Merci,
be able
Madame
to give
la
you more
modératrice.
detail on
Thank
this.
you so
Thank you
much.
very
I
much.
also just wanted to remind everyone listening that if you want to, you can add your questions for Dr. Gay on or for the other speakers in the Q&A. And we're going to get to your questions once we open the floor for discussions. So to our next speaker now, Mr. Kayongo Edward. He's here to speak on behalf of the East African Regional Evidence Synthesis Initiative, which is led by the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis in Kampala, Uganda. He's a senior research scientist and technical coordinator for East Africa with ACRES. Mr. Kayongo, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Erin, for that introduction. As Erin has put it, my name is Kayongo Edward, a senior research scientist at ECAS, which is part of the RSC initiative, that is East African Regional Evidence Synthesis Initiative. So under RSC, we have four country teams: ECAS, which is based in Uganda. Then we have Malawi Liverpool Wellcome Trust, MLW, which is in Malawi, Ethiopian Public Health Institute, based in Ethiopia, and Serihi, that is based in Tanzania. So our work in clean energy and transitioning to low carbon economies as a hub has had four core dimensions to it. So the first dimension is policy and decision maker engagement. Given that we are entering this space for the first time, so we had to have extensive engagements done with the policy and decision makers. The second dimension is on capacity enhancement, on the use of evidence by the stakeholders within this space. The third dimension is producing rapid response briefs, which is the core of exactly what we do, that we use to guide or inform policies with evidence during the decision-making process. Then the final dimension was the piloting of interactive apps for evidence synthesis to inform policies. So today I would just want to zoom in on the innovative views of the interactive apps to inform policies and decisions. So what exactly did we do with the interactive evidence apps? We developed the interactive evidence apps in response to three core questions from the National Renewable Energy Platform, that is NREP, based here in Uganda. Each of these questions was chosen for their potential to evolve beyond the initial inquiry and the dynamic nature of the data that we kind of used to inform the decisions that these questions intended to inform. So the questions addressed three major areas, that is solar energy use in health facilities in Uganda, clean energy use for cooking, lighting, and heating within refugee settlements, and then the intersection or the programs and interventions that are at the nexus or the intersection of productive use of renewable energy, which is abbreviated as pure, and then regenerative agriculture in Uganda. So the last question essentially was looking at those interventions that incorporate both use of renewable energy and regenerative agriculture, which kind of fits perfectly into clean energy use and transition to a carbon-free kind of economy. So the dynamism of the data that I hinted on can be easily explained by the changing status of the functioning of the solar facilities in Uganda. So the number of health centers that have solar facilities can easily change overnight. Today, the solar facility is working. Tomorrow, the solar installations are not working. But also, the number of health facilities that are installed with solar also easily changes overnight, because today you could take a sample and you find that, let's say, 80% of the health facilities have solar panels installed. Tomorrow, you will take another sample and you find that an additional maybe 1% of those facilities have had solar installed. And 1 month down the road, for one reason or another, maybe that figure will drop. So you find that this data is very dynamic in nature. So a static report would ideally not be fit for purpose if you're trying to use this information to inform an ongoing decision-making process, especially in scenarios where the decisions are being made over a long period of time. So our approach was to collaborate closely with the policymakers to explore all possible lines of inquiry relevant to the decision-making process, ensuring that the apps we are to develop could actually support robust decision-making. So built as Shiny apps in our studio, these tools are developed with data that is uploaded through online files, which enables automatic updates of the analytics whenever the data in the online files is updated or new data is added to those online files. So through that process, you are assured that the insights that are coming out of your evidence synthesis remain current and relevant to the ongoing deliberations by the decision makers. So then the question comes in, you've developed these apps, they can run these analytics and everything. How about the reports that are supposed to be used by the policymakers in their deliberations? So for report generation, what we essentially did was to integrate AI into the Shiny apps that we developed using R, and we trained the AI to solely generate reports basing on the data and the analytics from the app. So this kind of allows the policymakers to prompt for customized reports based on their specific needs. So in a way, this gives policymakers full ownership of the information and of the reports that are coming out. They can control data inputs, they can request for tailored analysis, and then they can generate reports directly from the app. This approach eliminates the need for bulky static reports. If you are to generate a report that kind of looks at all possible angles, all possible questions that can come out of the decision-making process. So for example, today I come and I give you a report of, let's say, stakeholders that are within the pure RN nexus. During the deliberations, the policymakers now get to wonder who of these stakeholders is central to the network. Then the other day they are wondering how much funds have come into the pure RA Nexus. So you find that if you are to generate a report that is static, a one-off, it is going to be very bulky, which is going to affect the decision-making process in a way that it is really not fit for purpose, because the information will be hidden inside very many pages. But with this approach, where the policymaker can prompt for specifics to the app and AI generates the reports, it kind of fosters efficiency, improves the deliberations that the policymakers have to kind of go through in informing their decisions. And in a way, it kind of leads to user-driven insights into the data and ultimately evidence used to inform the policies and decisions that the policymakers are coming up with. So to illustrate how this app works, I am going to share a version of one of these apps in the chat window. That is the second version of version 4 of this particular app. This is one that is focused on the pure RA Nexus. So if policymakers during their deliberations identify new lines of inquiry which we had not included into the apps, they get in touch with us and we update the app accordingly. But we do not just go ahead and update the app. Depending on the new line of inquiry, we explore a little bit more and try to understand what else can be asked in that line of inquiry and include those analytics into the updated version of the app. So generally speaking, this approach empowers stakeholders with flexible, real-time tools to make evidence-informed decision-making, which ensures that the policies are both informed and adaptable. Thank you very much. Over to you, Erin.
Thank you. Wow, excellent presentation. Thanks so much. So we have one more speaker, and after that, we're going to open the floor for a panel discussion. So I look forward to introducing our special guests who are inviting us to offer their, who are joining us to offer their important perspectives on advancing the transition to low carbon economies in Africa through evidence-informed policy making. So we have Dr. Johannes Attila. He is here to represent the Alliance for Evidence and Equity in Policymaking in Africa. He is also the executive director of the African Research Impact Network, known as ARIN, and the co-director of the Climate Finance and Sustainability Center at Makerere University. And I know Dr. Johannes is taking time out from a very busy week at the Africa Climate Summit in Addis. So very happy that you're able to join us. And over to you, Dr. Attila.
Thank you very much, Erin. First of all, allow me to apologize for joining late. As you mentioned, I'm here in Addis Ababa for the Africa Climate Summit, and the topic of low carbon transition for Africa is quite central. Apologies, I've been trying to run up and down. Things are a bit up and down now because the conference is just closing, and the interministerial positions just going to be read. So there's a lot of movements. So I'm sorry that I've joined late. Now, as the moderator said, I represent the LIPS program in the Anglophone region by AFIDEP in collaboration with ARIN. ARIN is the Africa Research and Impact Network, which I lead, and with also in collaboration with the Makerere School of Gender Studies, as well as the African Institute for Policy Systems based in Nigeria. So we work in Kenya and Nigeria, and the main aim of this hub is basically to support or strengthen the structures for evidence uptake in the energy and reproductive health sector. Now, strengthening structures for evidence uptake is very critical because we realized that there's a big gap in terms of really sustainable systems that really can take up available data, available research to be able to inform decisions, but also to be able to inform practice. So such systems include the institutions that are present, the capacity. But most importantly, within the hub, our hub, we noted that there is already some, attempts and effort to use evidence to inform, especially renewable energy policies, for instance, in Kenya, and of course, in line with low carbon energy transition. But also we realize that the sector is quite multi-sector, multifaceted in the sense that there are a lot of sectors that feed into it, including water, including forestry, and all that. And one of the gaps we noted is the aspect of lack of proper capacity just to manage this multi-sectoral framework to be able to then ensure that the evidence speaks to that particular context. And so because this was need-driven, so we focused more on capacity building, supporting the policymakers in the energy ministries, supporting also researchers who are working with these policymakers, supporting the civil society actors on skills and training them on ways in which they can, first of all, understand available evidence, interpret it, and use it. And this is important because the availability of evidence does not automatically translate to use. There are structures that really sort of completes that particular value chain. So we've done quite a lot of targeted training on these particular stakeholders, and we see a progress in terms of the appreciation in terms of, the stakeholders appreciating the usefulness of the evidence and the need to use it. But I want to mention that all the effort that we've done as the Anglophone Hub basically has not changed the situation so much as we had expected. And I would say that most of the trainings have mainly steered what I call more awareness rather than really transforming the institutions and the structures. And this also points to the fact that the stage at which most of our policymakers in the energy transition space, the stage at which they are is still really very underdeveloped, and there is need for a lot more capacity building to really support the systems to be able to appreciate and be able to take up the evidence that is needed. But this is also compounded by the fact that a sector like energy and low carbon transition in an inclusive way is quite complex in the sense that the governance systems of this sector at the very macro formal level, the governance systems are quite sector-based. So they're isolated. It's in the energy sector, yet, we depend on, for instance, hydroelectric power. There's the water sector, then there's the forest sector. So at that macro level, there's a bit of isolated or sort of, disfranchised governance system, which actually is divided across siloed sectors. Now, if you come to the practical space where really this, when we talk about inclusive low carbon transition takes place, for instance, look at clean cooking sector, you realize that the processes are quite interlinked. The same forest that communities would use to, to draw firewood is the same forest that communities would use as a source of livelihoods, a source of medicine. So there is a bit of tension between these different levels, and therefore institutionalizing evidence in that complex system is quite a huge challenge. Nonetheless, what we've done as a hub, because we know that this is a long-term journey, it's not just a one-off process, we have instituted what we call a network of evidence uptake champions. And through a mini grant scheme, we've been able to support a number of young policymakers and researchers to be able to undertake case studies and be aware of ways in which evidence can be taken up. And our hope is that this cohort of people, this network, can sustain this process, the trainings, the engagements, even beyond the LEAPS project timelines. The final thing I want to mention here is that the transition to low carbon energy processes in a developing context like Kenya is also is characterized by a variety of pathways. We have the policy pathways where policy transitions are being instituted in terms of new policies that really promote clean energy, clean cooking. We have technological pathways in terms of new technologies, solar, that are also in the space. We have the market transitions where the market systems are also changing based on, in response to the policy and the demands that are there. We have ecological transition, but most importantly, we have the social transitions in terms of how people are socially affected by these changes. Now, when talking about evidence institutionalization, therefore, it is important to know where to really target, which transition are we targeting to ensure that inclusivity and gender sensitiveness is achieved. And from what we've seen is that the social transition is an important entry point to focus or target evidence, but with a knock-on effect on the other transitions in the space. So I would stop there. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to respond to any questions. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Atella. This is just a great presentation, and we feel like we're getting things live from the ground there in Addis also. So it's really nice. Thank you so much. So now it's time to move to our panel discussion. A reminder just to please submit your questions using the Q&A at the bottom of your screen if you can. So we have two special guests joining our panel to discuss their experiences working with the LEAPS hubs on advancing the low carbon transition and in low carbon economies in Africa. We have Dr. Nicholas Mukisa. He is our guest policymaker. He serves as the Deputy National Coordinator and Head of the Technical and Partnerships at the National Renewable Energy Platform, which is an initiative established by the government of Uganda's Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. Dr. Mukisa has over 10 years of experience in research and consultancy and management and teaching. And we also have a second guest on the panel, is Madame Fatim Barry, and she is the Gender Promotion Advisor for the Ministry of Humanitarian Action and National Solidarity in Burkina Faso. She also has over 10 years of experience in gender issues, gender-based violence, and the protection of women and children, along with statistical analysis and sectoral planning. Madame Barry is also a recipient of a fellowship program for women in the evidence into policymaking ecosystem in West Africa through the Evidence Policy Action Center of Excellence. So welcome to you both. Bienvenue à vous deux. The panel discussion will be moderated by my colleague Flaubert Biekop. Over to you, Flaubert.
Merci, Erin.
Thank you, Erin. We will begin our panel discussion with our special guests. And then we could invite our LEAPS partners to join us.
Just a reminder to all speakers that we will aim to keep answers to 1 to 2 minutes in order to allow us to get to as many questions as possible from the audience. Welcome, Dr. Nicholas. Bienvenue, Madame Barry.
Welcome,
Let's
Madame
start
Barry.
by putting your work into context, Dr. Nicholas. Can you tell us about your job as a policymaker and where research evidence comes in to support your work?
Yeah, thank you very much, and greetings to all the people joining on this webinar. Yes, I'm Dr. Nicholas Mukisa, and I serve as the Deputy National Coordinator at the National Renewable Energy Platform, abbreviated as NREP. NREP is a tripartite institution that is hosted by the Ministry of Energy that brings together government, development partners, and private sector to aggregate efforts and also coordinate interventions in the renewable energy ecosystem. And one of the thematic areas of interest that NREP focuses on is policy, is to do with policy, markets, and standards. But the other one is about knowledge management. So NREP serves around 5 thematic areas, but those 2 are key for this engagement, which is about policy as well as data management. And NREP is mandated to support ministry with evidence-based recommendations, policy recommendations, to also serve as a bank for data and information that might be appropriate. So for us, evidence-based policy interventions are very crucial because that's what we use to engage the policymakers, but also engage the partners in the sector to ensure that there is trackable impact of any intervention, be on the side of government or be on the side of the development partners. And in this undertaking, we've worked closely with our partners at ACRES, who have supported, and my colleague Edward has already spoken to the 5 areas where the 3 areas where they've supported us significantly. In one has been working on appreciating the clean energy ecosystem in the displacement settings, looking at the refugee, and I believe several of the people on this call are familiar that Uganda is one of the leading hosts of the refugees, with close to 2 million refugees in this country. And that puts pressure on our natural resources, looking at the forest, looking at the water resource. Then also you look at how do these whole refugees remain or live in Uganda in peace, where they're not denied or jeopardized from cooking resources. So we've had one study that has been led on by our colleagues at ACRES, that is informing the nature of the interventions, and we've been sharing this with some of our partners to show that what is available and what the evidence shows, which has also quick-started discussions by some of the partners that have been kind of hesitant to share their data about their interventions, because they note now the aggregation of the interventions does not report about their activities in the ecosystem. We've also looked at the solarization of health facilities, still with ACRES, and we are very appreciative of the visual tools that they have developed for us that aggregate and bring together some of this information. That has also brought out aspects of that help us to understand what's the coverage. How far have we reached in ensuring that all of health facilities have access to electricity? We, as a country, we have close to about 60% electrification and just about 40% off-grid. So some of these interventions have been supportive and helpful to engage the government, but also present aspects where we can have interventions from the different partners. I'll stop there to allow other questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mukisa. Now, maybe Madame Barry, je voudrais passer la parole. Alors,
I would like to turn it over to you. As a gender expert, what is your view on the place of women that they occupy in the evidence-based decision-making ecosystem in West Africa? Madame Barry, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to respond to this concern. Generally, we can say that women's participation in decision making is quite limited. And this is because they have a low participation in the decision making and in economic activities, generally speaking. And all this is related to the fact that inequalities, gender inequality persists. So different governments, they work with their partners to resolve these inequities. But the inequality remains. There were 30% of women that were supposed to be in legislative positions, or to allow them to express themselves in the decision-making process. But on the economic level, we have funding of different activities through helping women in their economic activities. But despite these initiatives, inequalities remain. Women are lagging. We don't have the statistics, and they are not being considered in policies and different programs to try to reduce these gaps. So to have women participate more, we have to invest more in programs that support women, be it on the political level or the economic level or generally, for almost all of the programs. So we have to focus on building their capacity, women's capacities, so that they can express themselves and have initiatives for them. And generally, despite that, we have to mention initiatives that are encouraging. Increasingly, we see women's networks, international networks, but also national and regional. So this is a step in the right direction, but we have to encourage these programs more, or support these programs that are going to allow women to truly participate. There is one example that is a financial boost for women. There is going to be a cohort of women leaders who are going to be models, and they're going to boost their participation in different countries. Also, budgets that are that raise gender awareness. This is also important. This is going to help reduce these inequities. Thank you, Madame Barry. Yes, we understand that we have to boost capacity and help women learn from one another, and also promote their participation in decision making. I would like to go back to Dr. Nicholas now.
I would like to get back to you. In your experience and looking at your peers, is it your impression that the culture of evidence-informed decision-making is already well anchored in the region? If not, how do we go about building such culture?
Thank you very much. I'll give an example of, the Uganda's energy policy of 2002. That was reviewed, and we've adopted the latest policy 2023. And if you look at the evidence, that there was no evidence used to engage or transition and draft a revised policy, whereby we did not do what we'd call like an audit of the previous policy, what it have what areas or intervention that were not appropriate, and also to ascertain where the failures emerged from. It's not yet, it's a new, I would say it's kind of a new approach to many of the governments within the region to base interventions on data. Most of them have always been based on what has worked elsewhere, what can we borrow? So normally you find that most interventions are majorly reliant on north-south or south-south transfer of interventions, or like we do with tech. So without ample appreciation of the local aspects and systems. So I think what is coming up as a new normal is now relying on data, using data to inform policy interventions. And I would mention today, for example, we're having discussions at the Ministry of Energy, and we're looking at what's the evidence about the interventions on productive use of energy. And government ministry was asking, what's there? What can we look at? One of those points mentioned was, of course, looking at tax exemptions. Some of the private sectors actors were asking tax exemption, and government is asking, show us the evidence of the previous tax waivers. What has been the impact of what has been done? For example, the waivers on fuels, has it brought about an uptake of this particular technology? Can we borrow the same intervention to promote a nascent technology? So this is what is now government is looking out for. And even Minister of Finance, particularly, if it's going to lend in those tax waivers, they want supporting evidence that by waiving this tax of this technology, this is the unexpected impact backed by evidence of a previous waiver and adoption records. So I think this is a new normal, and I believe that not many have yet appreciated it and taken it up. But I think if the movement is upheld and there's continuity on interventions and creating champions that would be out there at the different levels of ministries to champion evidence generation, we'll have a change from the business as usual to now a new mode of operation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholas. Madame Barry, je reviens vers vous. S'il vous plaît, vraiment en 2 minutes.
Madam Barry, in 2 minutes, can you tell us? You are a recipient of the fellowship program for women in the evidence and policy ecosystem in Francophone West Africa, supported by ACID and IPAR through the EPA Center of Excellence. How do you think this program can help you make the evidence ecosystem more inclusive? In 2 minutes, please. Thank you very much. I am very pleased to be a recipient of this fellowship program. We learn a lot through it, and we had capacity building through different topics related to the use of data in programs and policies and projects. So this is a great initiative for me, especially in terms of capacity building. And I can be the relay in our country because we have to fight against inequalities. Different countries can be donors, and each time there is a new program or a new policy or a new project, gender needs to be taken into account. So what this program and fellowship brings to me, well, today, I bring the message from my country so that we take gender into account for all programs so that we can reduce inequalities and have an inclusive governance. Thank you, Madame Barry. That's appreciated. Just a reminder for those who are watching online. You can ask your questions that are going to be forwarded to our panelists, and they will be answered in real time.
I would now like to invite our LIPS partners and guest speakers to join the conversation or the discussion. I would like to start by Mr. Nguye from IPA. Dr. Nguye, s'il vous plaît.
Dr. Gay, what strategies have you found most effective in collaborating with policymakers and translating complex research into concrete policy recommendations to support the transition to low carbon economies in Africa?
Merci,
Thank you
monsieur le modérateur. Par rapport à
for
cette
the question.
efficacité, en fait, en termes d'approche que nous
In
avons
terms of
créée, c'est
efficiency in our
l'approche de
approach,
co-construction,
our
co-construction
approach
avec
is
les
a
acteurs
co-building approach
Parce que le plus souvent, ce que
with
nous avons
local
vu,
actors. What we have observed
en termes d'acteurs, les besoins que nous avons sont au niveau de ces pays-là. Par exemple, si nous prenons une thématique,
in these
nous avons
countries,
certainement des producteurs de données
for
qui sont dans le
these
pays. Nous avons aussi des
topics, we have
décideurs
some
qui ont besoin de
producers
données.
in the country and
Mais ce
also
qui manque, c'est les liens entre ces
decision
acteurs.
makers who need
Nous
the
avons
data,
voulu faire un
but
peu de créer
there
une
is no
synergie,
link between the
sorte
two.
que
So we wanted to create a
les données
synergy.
qui sont produites sont des données qui sont produites au niveau
Data
local et qui répondent aussi au contexte de ces
that
pays.
are produced locally
Et
and
c'est dans cette
that
perspective-là que nous avons choisi
reflect
de
the
mettre en
local
place
context.
un écosystème
This is how
avec
we
des
wanted
innovations au niveau
to
de chaque pays,
create an
mais aussi de
ecosystem
regarder les thématiques.
with data from each
Pour chaque
country, but
thématique,
also to
il y a
look
un
at
intérêt. Par
different
exemple, la
themes.
thématique relative à la transition
For instance,
écologique sur les
here we are talking
énergies faibles à carbone,
about low
d'identifier
carbon,
les acteurs qui travaillent dans cette chaîne-là et de mettre en
the
rapport avec les décideurs
tradition
politiques
towards low carbon
qui ont besoin de ces
economies.
données contextualisées.
But
Et nous avons
the
vu un autre
policymakers
dispositif qui nous a
are
permis d'abord une
in need
acceptation, parce que
of
dans le cadre des données, nous avons
contextualized
une
data
sensibilité lorsqu'on parle
and a
de ceci,
methodology.
parce que je ne vais pas entrer dans les détails, mais
I'm not going to go into
théorie
details for
derrière
each
ce
country, but
phénomène-là.
there is a theory
Parce que la
behind
première chose d'abord, c'est de
our
rassurer
approach to data.
le décideur
So
que les
first of
données
all, we have to make sure for the policy, for the decision makers, that the data meets their needs, and the produced data are at the national level and allows it to develop this approach nationally. So we have to have a favorable environment for producing and using the data. And then we have to do some capacity building with actors to produce data, but also translate them so they are more accessible to the decision makers. And we have to help the data producers to translate the data. But it would also depend on the culture of using it, which is not present. So in the research, we have to have actors who are going to integrate this. So these are the elements on which we have been working. And we really want to create a synergy for local opportunities. And we think this is the best way to develop the culture of using data, but also ensure that these the data is reliable and trusted. Thank you. So the key message is the need to build trust and restore trust between the public policymakers and also those who are generating knowledge in the local context.
Next, I would like to turn to Dr. Attila. Dr. Attila, as researchers, what are your biggest challenges in your efforts to institutionalize evidence use in government bodies, and how are you tackling them? In 2 minutes, please.
There are several challenges that researchers face in terms of linking the research they do to policy and practice, but I'll just highlight two which have emerged from the LIPS work that we do. One is that the policy uptake or the evidence uptake process is not entirely a technocentric process. So I think as researchers, we are relatively technical in terms of how we generate evidence and in terms of how we want that evidence to be used. But what we learn, or in fact, this is not just during the LEAP's time, but over time working in this science policy space, is the politics that underpin evidence uptake. So most researchers are yet to understand this politics and how to navigate it. And of course, because most researchers within the context are actually depending on short-term research projects that are funded from out of the continent. So the sustainability of the time to be able to engage with the policy process vis-a-vis project timelines is very limited. So there's a systemic issue there. The other aspect is the issue of science communication. I think this links to the first part. So ways in which, as I said in my first speech, that the availability of evidence does not necessarily make it usable. It takes a few more steps, value chain steps, for it to reach the policy itself, but even the practice itself. So I guess the communication, research, evidence communication remains a major challenge, and therefore capacity to support translation and linkage to targeted policy opportunities, I think is something that is still minimum, is still lacking. And I would say with a lot of confidence that in the R&D value chain, if I look at Africa and developing country context, we are still at that level of a lot of the experience and progress is needed still in the level of capacity building to even be able to understand the kind of evidence needed by the policymakers even before that evidence is given to the policymakers. So this is different from developed country context where systems are already in place in a way that evidence can easily be interlinked to the policy processes. So we need more investment in capacity to understand the evidence needs, capacity to be able to translate that evidence into relevant forms that can be used, of course, capacity to communicate it. But that is not also enough. There's a lot of other systemic institutional issues, some of which I highlighted in my first speech. So there, thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Attila. It's really interesting because you are emphasizing the importance of capacity building. And turns out there are some questions from the audience regarding the fellowship program that is supporting Madam Fatim. So there is definitely an interest in the ecosystem for such opportunities to learn and strengthen capacity to be able to speak to the needs of policymakers. That's very much appreciated. And yes, thank you so much. Maybe time to invite Mr. Kanyongo. Mr. Kanyongo, please, can you share an example of how your research directly informed a policy decision to support a country's advancement towards a low carbon economy? Please, in 2 minutes, can you give us an example?
Okay, thank you very much, Flabert, for that. So, well, I have several examples to this, but let me try zero in down on one of the examples that we've talked about in terms of the nexus between pure, that is productive use of renewable energy, and then regenerative agriculture. So NREP has a program that is supposed to run for the next 5 years. And as part of this program, they wanted to roll out different interventions that are looking at use of renewable energy in regenerative agriculture. So what our role was in that piece of work was to kind of come up with an analysis and synthesis that shows that different stakeholders in Uganda that are within this space and do different pieces of analysis that brought to the fore who of these stakeholders is central, who of the stakeholders, for example, who are in regenerative agriculture, but are not necessarily playing within the space of pure renewable energy use, and those ones in renewable energy use that are not necessarily playing into the regenerative agriculture space. So we compiled this information, brought it together to NREP, and NREP has used that information to identify, first and foremost, the interventions that are currently within the country that can just be expanded upon instead of reinventing the wheel, given that there is already some pieces of work that are ongoing, but also to engage the different players on the different lines, different divides of regenerative agriculture and pure, to identify areas of collaboration and exploitation so that they can come together and harness the power that regenerative agriculture and pure kind of has. So that is one example. Then the second example is on the electricity cooking tariff. So Uganda has a program or a policy on electricity cooking. So we buy electricity units, and at a given threshold, you cross into the category that is supposed to benefit from lower rates to support clean cooking using electricity. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, the moment you buy electricity units of about $30 within a month, any additional purchases you make, you automatically qualify for lower tariffs. So this program has been rolled out in the country, I think, for about 3 years to date, but there isn't really systematic data that has been collected to try and understand whether this particular policy is achieving its intended goals or not. So we undertook evidence synthesis to this cause, trying to understand whether first people know about the electricity cooking tariff. Second, are people actually using the provision of the electricity cooking tariff, and is it achieving its intended purpose? So we pulled this information together, supplied it to NREP for additional deliberations. One of the outcomes of that piece of work was to undertake a national survey that NREP is currently undertaking to try and understand nationally how is this policy actually working. Then second, still in line with that, we've undertaken additional evidence synthesis to try and identify other alternatives to electricity cooking tariff that can be considered to achieve clean cooking using electricity in Uganda. That information has also been supplied to NREP, which is at the interface between us. As Dr. Mukisa indicated, it's a tripartite kind of institution. It is at the center of government, development partners, and the private sector. So we've gotten this information through to NREP. They've deliberated on different approaches, and that information is being used to kind of inform ongoing discussions on how best Uganda can achieve the target of moving people from carbon cooking towards clean cooking using electricity. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much for those insights. So you basically highlighted the importance that you are playing in, scaling some successful initiatives. That's very much appreciated. Let me give the floor to Dr. Mukisa once again. Can you provide a specific example of how you worked directly with your LIPS counterparts to resolve a policy or program question through evidence that informed your decision making? Dr. Mukisa?
Thank you very much. Yes, and I will strictly speak to the one of the cooking tariff that my comrade Edward was speaking to. So one of the projects we are implementing at the Ministry of Energy is funded by the UK government and is promoting the use of electric cooking or clean cooking technologies. And as we were implementing, we came to a point where we realized there was a minimal appreciation of the electric cooking tariff that the government actually implemented as back as 2021. So we needed to know what's the evidence out there. Have scholars done some significant write-up on this? Is there any evidence to speak to the fact that electric cooking tariff has stimulated demand or transition to use of electricity to cook amongst the Ugandans? But also how many out there understand and even have a really appreciation, but even basing, comparing to other countries, is there any other country that has a similar arrangement? And this information has really helped us to engage ministry, and we have internal discussions. For example, from the findings, we've also aggregated them with what MEX was also implementing under the former utility manager, Umeme, piloting the use of electric pressure cookers. And we've noticed that surely the tariff needs a bit of revision. And we presented evidence that evidence generated through the partner, the rapid evidence generation by ACAS. We've also done some surveys in the Greater Kampala Metropolitan to appreciate if the dwellers really know or are familiar with the cooking tariff. And evidence has depicted that out of 100, only about 4 people really know even what the electricity cooking tariff means. So we've embarked on a campaign with the Minister of Energy and the regulator at the Electricity Regulatory Authority to create appreciation and understanding of what the tariff is all about. And a few months where we've had this campaign and engagements, we've had witness testimonies coming through from some of the participants in our engagement saying, look, I've tried to load this amount of money, about maybe like about $40 of electricity. I've received this amount of it, and actually, go into another month with the amount of its life. Previous way I would load about $10 every round. So that is what we've so far come to through this evidence, through the evidence we've worked with ACAS on electric cooking tariff. The other one is about the solarization of institutions. We've also had discussions with the Ministry of Energy, and we're in plans to undertake a nationwide study to ascertain for those, because there are several, the report that the data shows several institutions and facilities are electrified. But we want to appreciate, is it only the face value that they have solar systems, or these solar systems are really operational? And also to ascertain what's the level of these systems. These facilities are off-grid. So we are in 2 plans, and we're engaging with the ministry and some partners to put together some resources that will enable us to do a nationwide sweep to understand the status of these institutions beyond what is already reported as installations at the facilities. So that's all I could submit to that fact.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mukisa. It's very interesting that you are emphasizing the importance of information, which is something that is also emerging from another stream of work that at IDSC we are supporting as part of a major initiative on clean energy transition in the Global South. But that's conversation for another day. Maybe I can now move to West Africa. I will come back to East Africa, but for now, let's move to West Africa with Dr. Amadou from IPA. And the question will be in French. Donc, Dr. Amadou, comment vous assurez-vous
Dr. Amadou, how can you ensure that the synthesis work that you do, that the data synthesis work that you do, remains relevant to the evolving needs of policymakers, particularly if we think of a complex issue such as the transition to a low carbon economy?
Merci pour s'assurer de la
Thank
pertinence
you very much.
de cette
To
des
ensure
données que nous
relevancy
produisons.
of the data that we
Nous avons quand
produce,
même voulu en fait, partir
we
des
wished
acteurs
to
qui travaillent sur
work
cette
with
question-là. Par exemple,
different actors
parce
and
que cela
stakeholders who
demande
work
quand même une veille
on the issue.
plus
So it
stratégique pour
starts
voir
from them,
exactement en termes
and
d'évolution
we need
des
to
données, mais aussi en
strategize with
termes
them with regard to data
d'exigence au niveau
evolution,
des pays, qu'est-ce qui est
but
pertinent.
also with regard to what
Cela
is
est
relevant
basé
to
sur
each of the
l'utilisation des
countries.
ressources internes.
This is based on the use of internal resources. So today we are working on, for example, if I look at the case of Mali or Burkina Faso or even the Ivory Coast, where we're trying to look at methodology, we're trying to see if the traditional data collection with regard to climate change works. And in Mali, we are accompanying different stakeholders for a systematic review of data that has been produced in the last 10 years in order to do a in order to do planning for the future. So we are using internal resources. So the researchers in Mali and in Ivory Coast, those who understand the problem and those who follow closely the situation in the country. So by having those two actors internally, we work with searchers who know the problem very well, and then the policymakers use their own methods to work with that. So that's an internal process that we use. We also work to have systematic consultations. Recently, for example, we've had to proceed to consultations in Mali and Burkina Faso. So we're working on different thematics to make sure that each stakeholder can give his or her perspective on different issues. So we're gathering a multitude of information, and we wish to take from that what is relevant with regard to each one of the countries. So in summary, I think that this approach is really based on using internal resources, those who know the situation on the ground, who know the requirements, and also the aspirations of the different actors. Thank you so much, Dr. Amadou. I appreciate it. Okay, so we can now move back towards the eastern part of the country.
Dr. Attila, looking ahead, what innovations or approaches are you exploring to strengthen the link between evidence and policy?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Once again, building on what I mentioned as the key challenges in linking evidence to policy, one of the things we are trying to do is to make the link between research that we do, evidence that we produce, and policy to be a continuous process, not a one-off event. And so we are creating frameworks that could support what I call co-creation between researchers and policymakers in a way that it is possible to work together to design research questions, to co-publish research findings and co-translate the findings, and then directly co-utilize those findings into the policy space. So that's what we really do also in the context of the work we do as ARIN, as a network of researchers and policymakers. The foundational principles between, of ARIN is basically to create those connections in a sustainable fashion so that within our fellowship network, we have about 30% of our over 200 fellows as policymakers and about 70% as researchers. And we, co-engage in a number of activities, a number of research, a number of convenings, a number of publications. I think some of the policymakers that we supported through the mini grant schemes have also been able to really produce evidence that they're able to use. So that's one key aspect, creating networks of champions for evidence for decision makings, for decision making. I think that for us is a sustainable way to look at the process. Two, I think, is the issue of learning. I think there are a lot of examples where evidence has been used for impact, but some of these are relatively sometimes invisible. And because of that, they're not scaled out. So we try to create a space where there can be sharing on some of these practices, so that we can understand what are the mechanisms that have been used in particular cases to really achieve research impact. And if these mechanisms can be replicated in various contexts, then that for us is an opportunity really to learn, but not to say and complain every time that this is not happening. Already there are pockets of where this is happening, and we need to make them more visible so that they can be adopted and scaled into different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Attila. It's very interesting the way you are insisting on the importance of capacity. And we have a related question from the audience, which is an illustration of the importance of making sure that all the stakeholders in the ecosystem basically align, are clear what is that we are talking about, what is that we are trying to achieve. And the question speaks to this issue of translating data to make it accessible to policymakers. So obviously, some of us in this webinar today don't understand what you people mean by translating data. I don't know if in 1 or 2 minutes, some of you can help us address that question. What do you mean by translating data to make it accessible? I guess this question is better answered by a researcher than a policymaker. But of course, Dr. Attila, you're also welcome to chip in if you feel like it.
No,
Hello?
I'll let my colleagues go, and in case I can add. But I guess also a policymaker could answer that quite well. What kind of data do they really want to see? What makes sense to them in the process? But yeah, be good to hear both perspectives.
Je peux juste commencer.
I could start.
Pour moi, dans la perspective
For me,
de traduire les données,
when we talk about translating data, it has to be integrated in a process because we are talking about translating research, but after the research is completed and it is in the form of an article, that's when we're talking about transferring knowledge. The decision maker has to have access to that. That's one of the formats that is used, but in our work, this translation or transfer of knowledge has to be part of a co-creation process. Once the issue is identified, well, those who are supposed to be using this knowledge must be integrated in the process. So this is part of the methodology. And then we can apply the results that can be transferred. But they have to be interested. But the accessibility dimension is for the understanding, but also in terms of the decision maker's interest in it. Because most people, when they talk about transferring knowledge or knowledge transfer, it is about simplifying the information so that the decision maker can understand it. But I think there is this second aspect, which is interest in the information, and also the format in which the information is presented so that the decision maker can access it and use it for policy making and programs.
Maybe we're going to leave it there and move to the next intervention by Dr. Kanyongo. Sorry, Mr. Kanyongo. Please, would you say that the evidence into policymaking ecosystem is inclusive in Africa? If not, what is LEAPS aiming to do about it? Mr. Kanyongo?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. So I should say when it comes to inclusivity of the use of evidence to inform policies and decisions in Africa, it's I should say it's both a yes and a no in a way. So it is, yes, in a way, in that a lot of efforts currently underway to try and ensure that evidence use is more inclusive. For example, I know for sure within the East African region, and by extension parts of the southern part of Africa, different policies have been set to try and ensure that all government policies are fully informed by the best available evidence. The case for West Africa, our colleagues Amadou will can kind of chip in at that. So that is a yes, in that governments have appreciated the use of evidence, and they are trying to push for it. They are creating policy units within different ministries to ensure that there is support to the decision makers within the ministries to use evidence. The no aspect to it is that these policies have been set, true, but then should I say, the operational ability of these policies is still um, kind of suboptimal, in that currently, as we speak, a policy will be developed, and we shall tick off boxes within our settings that evidence has been used, but not necessarily what kind of evidence has been used. So you'll find that we still have policies that have been informed by expert opinions, which people within the knowledge translation space know that is not the best kind of evidence. It is evidence, true, but it is colored by the experts' biases. So if we still have policies informed by expert opinions, and at the end of the day, in trying to track how evidence was used, we tick that evidence was used, then there is a challenge at that. Second, governments are trying to ensure that the individuals who are going to be affected by these policies are actually engaged throughout the process of developing the policies. However, this approach is used depending on who the key decision maker is and what the policy is about. We all know that policies are still colored a lot by politics and individual interests and different manifestos by the ruling parties and all of that. So irrespective of what the evidence says, you'll provide this evidence, fine, but the evidence will be used to inform the policy, but does not necessarily mean that the policy will go the direction of what evidence says. So with that in mind, how LIPS then is coming in to support the more inclusive use of evidence, generally within the regions where LIPS is, and lucky enough, it is both in Eastern, Western Africa, is that part of the interventions we are undertaking as LIPS is capacity enhancement, not only for the researchers and knowledge brokers, but also for the policymakers. And the target has been for both the policymakers who are in the technical capacities, but also the politically elected or nominated policymakers. In that, if you kind of target the policymakers at those two levels, you have the technical staff within the ministries appreciating the role of evidence in decision making, but also you have the political leaders in these ministries who in most cases are the final decision makers, also appreciating the role of evidence. So you're kind of approaching it from both angles to try and ensure that during the development of these processes, the individuals who are developing the policies ensuring that evidence is imputed into the process, but also the people who are going to have the final say, who sit within the senior technical meetings within the ministries, can also push for the individuals who are presenting the policies to them to understand how the evidence was used and what kind of evidence was used. So that way, LIPS is kind of covering those bases. However, as Johannes rightly pointed out, the project life cycles can affect these kinds of endeavors. So it is really, really important to build champions so that in the event that the project ends, the champions are already built within the system and they can ensure continuity of the process. And I should say that under the current phase of LEAPS, we have actually managed to build these champions within the different sectors that we have engaged in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kanyongo. Unfortunately, we are almost getting to the end of this webinar. But Madame Barry, vous n'avez pas beaucoup parlé.
You didn't speak a lot. Perhaps in a minute, can you tell us, as an expert in gender and social protection with over 10 years of experience in statistical analysis and sector planning, how do you think an initiative like LEAPS could help African countries better integrate gender into their planning and sector policies? In 1 minute, please. Thank you for the question. I think that LEAPS is a key initiative that is going to allow different countries where these initiatives are implemented to obtain the maximum data that are gendered, and also the institutionalization of data. So for me, LEAPS is going to change the decision-making culture in the government. People who are in program development and policy development. For today's topic, we absolutely have to take gender into account in the transition to low carbon economies, because otherwise it's just going to be an adaptation. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have a lot of interesting questions left, be it from our public. Unfortunately, we have no more time, so we're going to have to cut the conversation short, but we can continue as we said, we say in English offline. So we would like to thank you for your interest and your participation. Today, we spoke about the transition to low carbon economies. What we can take away is the role and the significance of linking research and policy, which is very much like an art that requires carefully considered and coordinated actions. So coordination and planning, given the specific nature of these issues. Intentionality is key to the success of this vision, of these initiatives. And also what we can take away is that these efforts must be made to raise awareness and also build trust and bridges between the research community and policymakers, because this would lead to the best use of evidence. So it is clear that partnerships such as LEAPS play a critical role in strengthening a culture where data and evidence guide decisions at all
On that
levels.
note, I would like to take this opportunity to invite other like-minded donors to join us in scaling up the LEAPS initiative, for there is still tremendous potential ahead. And by working together, we can make sure that using evidence to be we can make sure that using evidence becomes second nature for every policymaker in Africa. On that note, let me hand over to Erin for the closing remark. Over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Flaubert. And yes, the time went by so quickly. So thank you so much to all of our panelists and presenters. Really excellent discussion today. Thank you so much. I won't go into too much detail. For me, I think, of course, I noticed, and you also noticed that the whole conversation was about public policy, right? But I would say we can also remind ourselves that there's another major domain of action where research evidence is much needed and valued, I hope, and that's the private sector action. So, it's just scope for far more work that Leaps could be doing. Anyway, I won't take more of your time. This concludes then the second part of our two-part series on the lessons and takeaways from Leaps. And you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the recordings and possibly some other information too. So thank you everyone for joining us. Merci beaucoup de votre participation. Bonne journée, bonne soirée.
Thank you
À
so much for
tous
your
et à toutes.
participation and have a nice day and evening. Thank you.